What if I told you that one of the most famous men in America, a man who has made millions of people laugh for decades, a man worth over $200 million, a man whose face appears on your television almost every single day, has been living a life filled with more pain, more loss, more heartbreak, and more controversy than most people could ever imagine? What if I told you that the story behind the smile is almost nothing like what you see on screen? Tonight, we are diving deep into the real story of Steve Harvey. Not the polished, suit-wearing, joke-cracking Steve Harvey you see on Family Feud. We are talking about the Steve Harvey who slept in his car, the Steve Harvey who stole food just to survive, the Steve Harvey who has been attacked, betrayed, publicly humiliated, and written off. Not once, not twice, but more times than we can count. At 68 years old, the full reality of Steve Harvey's life is something that will change the way you see him forever. So, settle in, because this story is going to take you on a ride. To understand who Steve Harvey is today, you have to go all the way back to January 17th, 1957. That's the day Broderick Stephen Harvey was born in Welch, West Virginia, a small coal mining town tucked into the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of town where the air smells like hard work and the dreams stay small if you let them. Steve was the youngest of 5 children, born to Jesse Harvey and Eloise Harvey. His father worked for just $5 a day. $5. And with that, he was expected to put food on the table and keep the lights on for a family of 7. It sounds almost impossible when you think about it. But Jesse Harvey did it with dignity, and he passed something priceless down to his youngest son: the belief that things could be better. Now here is where the story gets interesting, and where you start to understand just how unlikely Steve Harvey's success really is. As a child, Steve had a severe stutter. We are not talking about a mild hesitation here and there. We are talking about a stutter so bad that speaking in front of people was genuinely terrifying for him. The kid who would one day become one of the most recognizable voices in American entertainment could barely get through a sentence without struggling. And yet, even as a little boy with a speech problem growing up in poverty, Steve Harvey had a dream that most people around him considered borderline delusional. In the 6th grade, when his teacher asked the class to write down what they wanted to be when they grew up, Steve Harvey wrote, in plain, clear handwriting, that he wanted to be on television. His teacher did not applaud this ambition. She called it ridiculous. She actually called his mother to report that her son had been a, quote, smart aleck in class, because she thought writing that a poor kid from West Virginia wanted to be on TV was some kind of joke. She laughed at him. She humiliated him in front of his classmates. But here is what makes this moment so powerful. Steve Harvey's father did not laugh. His father looked at that paper and told his son to keep that dream alive. And Steve Harvey never forgot it. In fact, he got so far in life that he sent that teacher a television set every single Christmas for the rest of her life, so she could watch that same little stuttering kid from West Virginia on TV 7 days a week. You have to admire that. That is not just success. That is a message. The Harvey family eventually moved to Cleveland, Ohio, settling on East 112th Street, in a neighborhood that would shape Steve's comedic instincts and his hunger for something more. He attended Glenville High School, graduated in 1974, and eventually enrolled at Kent State University, where he joined the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. But college was not the right environment for Steve at that time in his life. He admits openly and without shame that he flunked out after 2 years. He later said it threw his life into a, quote, downward spiral, and that he genuinely regrets not getting that degree. After leaving college, Steve Harvey entered a period of his life that most people never talk about. A period defined not by spotlight or applause, but by survival. He worked as a boxer. He worked as an auto worker. He sold insurance. He cleaned carpets. He delivered mail. He was trying everything and finding traction in almost nothing. But here is what never changed through all of it: the dream. The voice in the back of his head that said he was supposed to be on a stage making people laugh. On October 8th, 1985, something happened that would change the entire trajectory of Steve Harvey's life, even if it didn't feel that way at the time. He walked onto the stage at the Hilarities Comedy Club in Cleveland, Ohio, and performed his very first stand-up comedy set. Now, nobody was handing Steve Harvey a record deal or a TV contract after that first show. This was not an overnight success story. Not even close. The late 1980s were about to become the darkest chapter of his entire life, a chapter that most celebrities would never dare to admit happened to them. Here is what actually happened. Steve Harvey's first marriage, to a woman named Marcia Harvey, fell apart. And when it did not just break his heart, it broke his finances, his stability, and his sense of direction all at the same time. He was a man with a dream and no foundation beneath him, and suddenly the floor gave out. Steve Harvey became homeless, not temporarily, not for a week or two. For 3 years, Steve Harvey, the same man who would later earn tens of millions of dollars a year, lived out of his Ford Tempo. He slept in the back seat of that car when he did not have a show that provided a hotel room. He showered at gas stations. He showered at public swimming pools. He survived on $50 a week, which is what the comedy clubs were paying him. He told People magazine in an interview, "It was crushing. I realized you're on your own." There were moments when he sat in that car and just broke down crying, wondering if any of this was going to amount to anything. He has spoken publicly about times when he resorted to theft just to eat. Not because he wanted to, because he was desperate. He was a father trying to hold himself together while chasing something that felt, on many days, completely out of reach. And yet he kept going. Night after night, city after city, club after club. He kept getting on that stage even when nobody cared. Even when the money was barely enough to put gas in the car he was sleeping in. He has talked about a moment in that car, sitting in the dark, completely alone, not knowing how he was going to make it, when he heard what he describes as a voice that said to him, "If you keep going, I'm going to take you places you've never been." He described it as God speaking to him directly. And he chose to believe it. "I just kept hoping beyond all odds," he later said, "that this process that I was going through would turn around for me one day." That faith, stubborn, irrational to some people, but absolutely unshakable, is the thing that separates Steve Harvey's story from hundreds of other talented people who gave up when the road got hard. He did not give up. He could not afford to, in every sense of that phrase. In 1990, 5 years after that first comedy club performance, something finally shifted. Steve Harvey entered the second annual Johnny Walker National Comedy Search and came out as a finalist. It was not fame yet, but it was recognition. It was validation from the industry that said, "This man has something." That moment gave him just enough momentum to keep the door open. And then came the opportunity that changed everything. Showtime at the Apollo. For those who don't know, the Apollo Theater in Harlem, New York, is one of the most legendary stages in American entertainment history. It's where careers were made and broken. It's where audiences were notoriously brutal. They would literally boo you off the stage if they didn't like you. And it's where Steve Harvey got his first real national television exposure as a host. He was electric on that stage. The personality that had been developing through years of sleeping in parking lots and performing in half-empty clubs suddenly had a platform worthy of it. People took notice. Television executives took notice. In 1996, the WB network gave Steve Harvey his own sitcom. It was called The Steve Harvey Show, and it ran for 6 seasons until 2002. He played a former funk musician named Steve Hightower who becomes a high school music teacher. The show earned him a loyal fan base, critical recognition, and enough financial stability to never sleep in a car again. But it was not just a sitcom. In 2000, Steve Harvey joined forces with 3 other comedic giants: Bernie Mac, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hewley for the Kings of Comedy tour. Spike Lee directed the concert film, and the original Kings of Comedy became a massive cultural event. Steve Harvey was no longer just a TV personality. He was a comedy legend. Then came the radio. The Steve Harvey Morning Show launched and became one of the most listened-to radio programs in the country. By 2007, it had won Radio and Record's Syndicated Personality and Show of the Year award. The show would eventually reach tens of millions of listeners across America, making Steve Harvey a daily presence in people's lives in a way that very few entertainers ever achieve. And then came the book that nobody expected to sell the way it did. In 2009, Steve Harvey published Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man. It was a relationship advice book. A man telling women how to understand men, which sounds like a premise that could very easily have flopped. Instead, it became a massive New York Times bestseller and sparked a cultural conversation that lasted for years. It was eventually turned into 2 successful Hollywood films. Harvey wrote 3 more best-selling books after that. By the time 2010 rolled around, Steve Harvey was handed the hosting duties for Family Feud. And that, more than anything else he had ever done, turned him into a true American institution. Family Feud was already a beloved show, but Steve Harvey transformed it. His ad-libs, his reactions, his ability to be simultaneously family-friendly and just barely on the edge of inappropriate. His genuine warmth with contestants. All of it combined to make the show appointment television in a way it hadn't been for decades. The ratings soared. His contract got richer with every renewal. And Steve Harvey became, by almost any metric you want to use, the most successful television host in America. 7 Daytime Emmy Awards, 2 Marconi Awards, 14 NAACP Image Awards. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is essentially inevitable for someone with this kind of record. From sleeping in a Ford Tempo, showering at gas stations, stealing food to survive, to all of this. The sheer distance of that journey is almost impossible to comprehend. Now, you cannot tell the full story of Steve Harvey without talking about his personal life. Because the personal life, the marriages, the divorces, the heartbreak on all sides, is one of the most complicated and painful chapters in a life that has had no shortage of complicated, painful chapters. Steve Harvey has been married 3 times. His first wife was Marcia Harvey. They were married in the early years of his career, and together they had twin daughters named Carly and Brandy, and a son named Broderick Harvey Jr. The marriage ended as Steve's career was starting to take shape, and by his own account, the divorce and the financial chaos that followed it is what sent him into homelessness. He has never spoken at length about the details of this marriage publicly, But the pain of that period is woven into almost everything he talks about when he discusses his darkest years. His second marriage to Mary Shackelford produced another son named Winton. And this divorce, finalized in November of 2005, became one of the most public, most brutal, and most heartbreaking marital dissolutions you will ever hear about in the world of celebrity. Mary Shackelford did not simply accept the end of the marriage and move on. She went public. She went very, very public. She released a 25-minute YouTube video, which at the time was an absolutely unprecedented thing for an ex-spouse to do, in which she claimed that Steve Harvey had cheated on her throughout their entire 10-year marriage. She alleged that he left her with essentially nothing. No money, no real settlement. And she claimed that he moved on to his third wife, Marjorie Bridges, before the divorce from her was even legally finalized. In interviews and public statements that spread across the internet, Mary Harvey said things like, "Steve Harvey owes me $50 million and I want him arrested." She accused him of violations of her civil rights, of perjury, of embezzlement, of extortion. In 2017, she filed a lawsuit claiming he had damaged her, quote, soul, and she demanded $60 million in damages. She said, and this quote will stay with you, "All was lost. Mary Harvey was dead." Now, a judge in Collin County, Texas, did weigh in on at least part of this situation. In 2011, Judge Robert Dry expressed serious concern about Mary Harvey's public statements, suggesting in court that she had not actually been left materially destitute in the way she claimed. The legal system, in other words, did not fully back up the most extreme version of her narrative. But here's the thing. Even if the facts were disputed in court, the emotional reality of Mary Harvey's pain was real to her. Whatever the truth of those years was, a woman emerged from that marriage broken. And that is not something you can just dismiss, no matter how successful the man who was her husband became. Steve Harvey met Marjorie Bridges in the late 1980s. Back when he was still struggling and homeless, believe it or not. But they lost touch. Years later, they reconnected, and in June of 2007, he married her. He has described Marjorie Harvey as the person who made him a better man. He adopted her 3 children, Morgan, Jason, and Lori, and the blended family has become part of his public identity. Lori Harvey, in particular, has become a celebrity in her own right. She has modeled for major brands, dated high-profile men, and cultivated a social media presence with millions of followers. Steve Harvey, being Lori Harvey's father, is a topic that comes up constantly in pop culture, partly because Steve is famously protective of his daughters and has made no secret of how he feels about the men who date them. But even this third marriage on the one he calls the love of his life, the relationship he credits with saving him, has not been without serious clouds. In 2023, rumors began circulating online that Marjorie Harvey had been unfaithful, allegedly with a bodyguard and a personal chef. The rumors spread rapidly across social media and became a significant public story. Steve Harvey addressed this directly at InvestFest 2023 in Atlanta. He was visibly angry. He denied the rumors forcefully and defended his wife and his marriage. "Those rumors are completely false," he said, and he did not mince words about what he thought of the people spreading them. Marjorie Harvey also issued a public statement denying any infidelity. Whether you believe the rumors or not, what that moment revealed is something important. Even at the height of his success, even with everything he has built, Steve Harvey's personal life remains a place of vulnerability. a place where the pain can still reach him. Now we need to talk about December 20th, 2015, because that night, live in front of tens of millions of viewers worldwide, something happened to Steve Harvey that would have broken a lesser person. Steve Harvey was hosting the Miss Universe pageant in Las Vegas. It was a prestigious assignment. 96 contestants from around the world had competed, and the night was building to its climax. The winner was about to be announced. Steve Harvey walked to the center of the stage with the envelope in his hand. He read the result. He announced that the winner of Miss Universe 2015 was Miss Colombia, Ariadna Gutierrez. The crowd erupted. Ariadna was crowned. She was crying. She was waving. The confetti fell. It was a beautiful moment. And then, a few minutes later, Steve Harvey walked back onto that stage with a look on his face that anyone watching immediately recognized as something being very, very wrong. He took the microphone. He said in front of the entire world that he had made a mistake, that he had misread the card, that Miss Colombia was not the winner. She was the first runner-up. The actual winner of Miss Universe 2015 was Miss Philippines Pia Wurtzbach. What happened next was one of the most painful things you will ever see on live television. The crown had to be removed from Ariadna Gutierrez's head. She stood there in tears. Pia Wurtzbach, who should have been celebrating the biggest moment of her life, was instead navigating one of the most awkward coronations in history. Some of the contestants surrounding them actually told Pia to step back as the confusion unfolded on live television. The internet exploded. Steve Harvey's name was the most searched term on Google. He was mocked mercilessly. Memes spread instantly. Late-night hosts had a field day. The story ran on front pages around the world, and then it got darker. Steve Harvey began receiving death threats. Not just angry comments online, actual death threats, many of them from Colombia, where Ariadna was from and where her loss was felt as a national humiliation. He has said in multiple interviews since then that he still maintains security today because of those threats. "I've had to have security ever since," he told Shannon Sharpe in 2023. Here is what happened behind the scenes, and this part of the story almost never gets told properly. Steve Harvey has explained that someone in production had changed the way the results were being announced. The card he was given listed both names, the winner and the first runner-up, in a format that was different from what he had been prepared for. When he looked at the card, he saw Colombia's name and read it as the winner. Not realizing the way the card was structured placed Colombia in the runner-up position. The producers, he says, initially told him to wait until the next morning to correct the error. Let it play out in the news, they said. Fix it quietly. But Steve Harvey made the call to walk back out there himself, immediately, and take full responsibility on live television. Years later, sitting across from Shannon Sharpe on the Club Shay Shay podcast, Harvey reflected on that decision with unexpected candor. He called it, in his own words, the stupidest thing I ever did. Not walking back out there, but taking all the blame himself. "I should have let them fix it in the news," he said. "My stupid ass walked right out there and took the full hit, man." In the morning after the Miss Universe pageant, Steve Harvey described waking up to find that the story had gone global overnight. He called it the worst week of my life. And coming from a man who was once homeless and stealing food, that is saying something. But here's what you need to understand about that moment. Despite all of that, the Miss Universe organization kept inviting him back. He hosted the pageant again in 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. He went to the Philippines specifically to apologize in person to the Filipino people. He kept showing up. He did not run from the embarrassment. He walked straight back into it over and over until the story changed. That is a resilience that is hard to fake. In 2017, something else surfaced that created a very different kind of conversation about Steve Harvey. A memo that Harvey had reportedly distributed to his production staff at his talk show became public, and the contents of that memo were startling. The memo laid out, in no uncertain terms, a set of rules about interacting with Steve Harvey. Staff were reportedly instructed not to approach him directly, not to stop him in hallways, not to attempt to speak to him unless he initiated the conversation, and not to enter his dressing room without permission. If they needed to communicate with him, they were to go through a specific contact person. The memo went viral almost immediately. The reaction was swift and largely negative. Critics said it painted a picture of a man who had become disconnected from the people around him, who had built walls between himself and the human beings who worked to make his show successful. The contrast between the warm, approachable, everybody's friend persona he projected on television and the cold, business-like distances described in that memo was jarring to a lot of people. Harvey addressed it. He said the memo had been taken out of context. He explained that he was someone who needed to be in a specific headspace before going on camera, and that the boundaries described in the memo were about maintaining that focus, not about arrogance or contempt for his staff. Whether that explanation was satisfying depended very much on who you asked, but it added another layer to the complicated portrait of Steve Harvey, a man who projects accessibility and warmth, but who behind the scenes operates with a level of control and separation that some found surprising. January 2024. Shannon Sharp's Club Shay Shay podcast, and one of the most explosive interviews in the history of the format. Cat Williams, comedian, provocateur, and a man who had clearly been saving up some things to say for years, sat down with Shannon Sharp and proceeded to unload. He talked about Kevin Hart. He talked about Cedric the Entertainer. He talked about the state of black comedy in America. And he talked at length about Steve Harvey. Williams accused Harvey of being a joke thief. He claimed that Harvey had stolen the concept for his 1990s sitcom from fellow comedian Mark Curry, who had been doing a show called Hangin' with Mr. Cooper, also set in a school, also with a character who wore a suit. Williams alleged that Harvey essentially watched Curry's show and replicated the premise. But then Williams went somewhere even more personal. He brought up Bernie Mac. For those who don't know, Bernie Mac was one of the other kings of comedy. He died in August of 2008 from complications related to sarcoidosis. He was 50 years old, and in the years since his death, there had been persistent whispers in the comedy world that during the Kings of Comedy era, there was real tension between the members, and specifically, that Harvey had not treated Mac as well as he could have. In a 2003 GQ interview, which Williams referenced, Bernie Mac himself had made statements suggesting Harvey had tried to sabotage him when it came to booking movie roles. Williams took that and amplified it. He said, according to his telling, that Harvey had worked against Bernie Mac, while simultaneously benefiting from the platform the Kings of Comedy gave all of them. He said, "I know the truth. You think I'm going to let you shit on Bernie and then come get me?" He also questioned the entire narrative of Harvey's homelessness. Williams claimed that Harvey had not actually been homeless the way he described, that the story was, in his view, exaggerated for effect. He said Harvey quit stand-up, not because he was too busy with 7 television shows, but because Harvey had lost a live comedy battle to Williams himself in Detroit in front of a real audience. And just to make sure nobody missed the personal dimension of his critique, Williams described Harvey as, and this is a direct quote, a country bumpkin black dude that can't talk good and look like Mr. Potato Head. The internet had an absolute field day. Steve Harvey did not respond immediately. For months he stayed silent. And that silence to his critics felt like confirmation. To his supporters, it looked like dignity. Then in August of 2024 at the Invest Fest conference in Atlanta, Harvey was on stage with Stephen A. Smith when the topic came up. And he swung back, hard. He said, "You'll never have a hater that's doing better than you. Always know that." He made references to his old boxing skills. He joked, at least initially it seemed like a joke, that he could still knock Williams out. He said in colorful language that he did not have any time for someone who, in his view, had nothing going for himself. The clip spread everywhere, and the reaction was mixed in a way that had to sting. Many people watching felt like Harvey had come across as defensive and overly aggressive, especially because Cat Williams, whatever you think of his methods, had landed some punches that many people in the comedy community thought had merit. Bernie Mac's daughter even came out publicly to praise Williams for speaking up about her father. In October of 2024, Harvey appeared on a BET documentary series called Black Comedy in America, and he used that platform to address the Bernie Mac accusations directly. He said, and this came across as genuinely heartfelt, "Bernie was a special dude, man. So when I hear stuff about us and I hear stuff about the dissension, I don't really know what they're talking about. The thing about Bernie was a man's man. So when somebody says they treated Bernie like shit, that was impossible." He also fired back at the general concept of comedians tearing each other down. "When did we get into the tear each other down business? You ain't never heard me say a disparaging remark against another comedian nowhere. We ain't cut from that cloth." By September 2025, Harvey had done something that genuinely surprised people. On the Pivot podcast, he admitted that his comments at InvestFest had been a mistake. He said he was joking when he made the physical threats, that the crowd energy had gotten to him, and that he had not fully understood how the clips would land when taken out of that context. He went even further and said he was open to apologizing to Cat Williams directly. "I believe his comments stem from personal grief and jealousy," Harvey said. Not an apology exactly, but a step towards something more than a standoff. What the entire episode revealed was something important. Steve Harvey, at 68, is still in the middle of a conversation about his legacy in ways that most people his age and stature are not. The questions being asked about him, about who he really is, how he treated people, what his story actually is, are live questions. Not resolved, not settled. There is one more layer to Steve Harvey's recent life that needs to be discussed, because it speaks to something genuinely disturbing about the world we live in now. Multiple times in 2023 and 2024, Steve Harvey became the target of death hoaxes. Not just one or two vague rumors like sustained, monetized, algorithmically amplified campaigns that spread the false story of his death to millions of people. In early 2024, false stories began circulating on social media claiming that Steve Harvey had died in a tragic accident, a car crash. These were not just random posts. Snopes confirmed that Facebook and its parent company, Meta, had actually accepted money from advertisers to run paid ads promoting these death hoax stories. The ads said things like, "Steve Harvey dead? Family Feud fans react to host's death trending." And they directed people to Chinese-based news aggregator apps designed to drive downloads and engagement. Millions of people saw these ads. Many of them believed them, at least initially. The concern that spread online was real. People genuinely worried about whether a man they had watched on television for decades was alive. And then in December of 2024, it happened again. An AI-generated article titled "Steve Harvey Passed Away Today: Remembering the Legacy of a Comedy Legend" was published on a website called Trendcast News. The article had a future publishing date, December 19th, 2024. It was picked up by a popular news aggregator app called Newsbreak and spread rapidly. Steve Harvey became the second most searched term on Google that Wednesday morning. People who woke up and checked their phones read a headline telling them he was gone. The article stayed live on Newsbreak's platform for hours. Harvey was, in fact, alive. He had posted on Facebook and X that very morning. He responded to the situation indirectly, posting an inspirational message that read, "When you feel like giving up," which many interpreted as an acknowledgement of the bizarre, draining experience of having to exist in a world where fake stories about your own death spread to millions of people while you're sitting at home having breakfast. Some people who saw the story online actually called for Harvey to sue the websites responsible. And while he did not take legal action, at least not publicly, the experience points to something deeply troubling about the way information works in the modern era. Powerful, wealthy, famous people are not protected from this. No one is. For a man who has already dealt with real attacks on his character, real controversies, real pain, to also have to navigate a world that manufactures fake versions of his death for profit is a particular kind of exhausting that is hard to fully articulate. Now let us take a step back and look at the full picture. Because amid all of the pain and all of the controversy and all of the complication, what Steve Harvey has actually built over the course of his life is staggering. He is the host of Family Feud, a show he has been leading since 2010, over 15 years, and which remains one of the most watched game shows in the country. He also hosts Celebrity Family Feud. He hosts Judge Steve Harvey, a comedic arbitration court show on ABC. He runs the Steve Harvey Morning Show, which reaches tens of millions of radio listeners each week. He founded Steve Harvey Global in 2017, an entertainment company that houses his production company, East 112, named after the street in Cleveland where he grew up. Through that company, he has expanded Family Feud internationally. There is now a Family Feud Africa that he launched. He is also a partner with Walt Disney World Resort and Essence magazine for the Disney Dreamers Academy, an annual workshop that brings 100 young students to Walt Disney World for mentorship and inspiration. He and his wife Marjorie run the Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation, a philanthropic organization focused on youth outreach and education, particularly for fatherless children. They run yearly camps. They've partnered with Kent State University, the very school he flunked out of, to provide scholarships. In March of 2024, it was announced that Harvey would join Merit Street Media, a new multi-platform media company being launched by his longtime friend, Phil McGraw, the former Dr. Phil. This signals that even at 68, Harvey is not winding down. He is expanding. His estimated net worth sits at around $200 million. He reportedly earns approximately $45 million per year. $10 million from Family Feud, $20 million from his radio show, and the rest from endorsements, public speaking, and other ventures. the neighborhood in Cleveland where he grew up, East 112th Street was officially renamed Steve Harvey Way in 2015. The city that raised him literally changed its address to honor him. He has written 4 books that became New York Times bestsellers. He has won 7 Daytime Emmy Awards. He has 14 NAACP Image Awards. He has 2 Marconi Awards for radio excellence. When you lay all of that out, it is almost incomprehensible that the same person who showered in gas stations and slept in a car and stole food just to get through the week is now the owner of a $200 million empire. Almost incomprehensible, but then again, incomprehensible things happen when someone refuses to quit. So what do we make of Steve Harvey? Because the picture that emerges from looking at this life closely is not a simple one. On one side, you have a story of genuinely extraordinary resilience. A man who stuttered as a child. A man who grew up with almost nothing. A man who flunked out of college. A man who was homeless for 3 years in his late 20s. A man who survived all of that through a combination of raw talent, stubborn faith, and the refusal to let the dream die no matter how cold or hungry or alone he was. That story is real. The homelessness is documented. The struggle is documented. The faith that carried him through, whatever you think of the religious dimension of his story, is real in the sense that it was the force that kept him moving forward when any rational calculation would have said to stop. On the other side, you have real questions. The accusations from his ex-wife, Mary Harvey, about how he treated her during and after their divorce are not trivial. The pain she expressed, whatever the legal reality was real. The questions about Bernie Mac that Cat Williams raised and that Bernie Mac himself seemed to raise before he died have not been fully resolved. The staff memo suggests a man who can be controlling and distant in ways that contradict the warm image he projects. The controversies over the years, the comments about Asian men that required an apology, the off-color moments on Family Feud that drew criticism, are all part of the record. Steve Harvey is not a simple hero, and he is not a simple villain. He is a complicated man who came from almost nothing, built something extraordinary, hurt some people along the way, helped many more, and is still, at 68 years old, very much in the middle of figuring out who he is and how he wants the world to remember him. What is clear is that the public image he has built, the jovial, faith-filled, down-to-earth family man, is real in some ways and incomplete in others. The man who sent that teacher a television every Christmas because she laughed at his dream is genuinely beautiful. The man whose ex-wife said she was emotionally destroyed is genuinely troubling. Both can be true about the same person. And maybe that is the most honest thing you can say about Steve Harvey. He is not a character. He is a person with a life that contains both grace and failure, both extraordinary achievement and real damage done. Let us talk about what you can actually take away from this story. Because even if you have complicated feelings about Steve Harvey the man, there are things in his journey that are worth sitting with. The first is this: the dream you have when you are young, the one that everyone around you dismisses, may be the most important thing about you. Steve Harvey wrote down that he wanted to be on television when he was 11 years old. His teacher thought it was a joke. He spent the next 40 years proving that it wasn't. Whatever your dream is, hold on to it with that same tenacity. The second lesson is about the nature of rock bottom. When Steve Harvey was homeless, sleeping in his car, making $50 a week, that was not the end of his story. It was, in a very real way, the beginning of it. Rock bottom has a way of stripping everything away except the thing you can't live without. For Harvey, that thing was comedy. Whatever it is for you, rock bottom may be where you finally find it. The third lesson is about faith. Now, whether you share Steve Harvey's specific religious beliefs is entirely your business. But what you cannot argue with is the function that faith played in his life. The function of a story that gave meaning to suffering. Of a narrative that said, this pain is not pointless, this struggle is not pointless, there is something on the other side of this if you keep going. Whatever provides that for you, faith, philosophy, purpose, love, do not let it go when things get hard. The fourth lesson is about the relationship between image and reality. Steve Harvey built one of the most recognizable personal brands in American entertainment. But the gap between that brand and the full complexity of the actual human being is real. This is not unique to him. It is true of almost everyone who operates at that level of public life. But it is worth remembering when we consume celebrity stories, including this one. The person is always more complicated than the image. The fifth lesson is about resilience after public failure. The Miss Universe moment of December 2015 was one of the most embarrassing things that has ever happened to a television host on live television. And Steve Harvey went back. He hosted that pageant again. He did not hide. He did not quit. He showed up. There is something powerful in that. In the refusal to let a public humiliation define you. And the sixth lesson, perhaps the most uncomfortable one, is about accountability. The parts of Steve Harvey's story that are troubling are not going away because of all his accomplishments. The pain of the people who say he hurt them does not get erased by the number of awards on his shelf. True resilience includes facing those parts of yourself honestly, not just celebrating the wins. As of early 2026, Steve Harvey is 68 years old. He is still working. He is still on Family Feud. He is still on the radio every morning. He is still building through Steve Harvey Global. He is still mentoring young people through his foundation. He has made comments in various interviews about what the next chapter looks like. He talks about legacy, what he wants to leave behind for his children and grandchildren. He has 5 grandchildren now, and by all accounts, being a grandfather is one of the great joys of his current life. His marriage to Marjorie Harvey appears to have survived the online storm of rumors that targeted it. They remain together, and Harvey has continued to speak publicly about her as the anchor of his life. The Cat Williams situation remains unresolved, though Harvey's statement on the Pivot podcast about being open to an apology suggested at least some movement toward a different kind of conversation. The death hoaxes continue to circulate periodically, as they do for many high-profile celebrities in the age of AI-generated content and clickbait. Harvey appears to have developed something approaching philosophical acceptance of this particular brand of ugliness. What is most striking about Steve Harvey at this stage of his life is that he continues to be a genuinely polarizing figure. There are people who love him without reservation, who see him as a living proof that faith and perseverance can carry you from the lowest possible place to the highest. And there are people who look at the full arc of his life, including the difficult parts, and feel something more complicated. Both reactions are legitimate. That is what it means to live a full life. Here is where we land. Steve Harvey's story is not a fairy tale. It is not a clean narrative of good triumphing over evil. It is the story of a real human being, complicated, gifted, flawed, resilient, sometimes brilliant, sometimes wrong, who came from almost nothing and built something enormous, and who carries at 68 years old both the weight of that achievement and the weight of everything that happened along the way. The reality of his life is, as the title of this video says, beyond heartbreaking, but not in the way you might have expected. It is not heartbreaking because he is a tragic figure. It is heartbreaking because it is so deeply, painfully, unmistakably human. The little boy who stuttered and had a dream. The young man who slept in his car and refused to give up. The comedian who made the world laugh while carrying a private sadness. The husband who has loved and lost and loved again. The man who stood on one of the biggest stages in the world and had to publicly correct the most embarrassing mistake of his career. The entertainer still grinding at 68, still creating, still fighting. All of that is Steve Harvey. All of it is real. And if there is one thing his life teaches us more than anything else, it is this. The story is never as simple as it looks. The smile does not tell you everything. The success does not erase the struggle. And the person standing in the spotlight is always carrying something you cannot see. That might be the most important lesson of all. If this story hit you the way it hit me, I want to know which part stood out most. Was it his years of homelessness and what that kind of rock bottom does to a person? Was it the Miss Universe night and how he handled one of the most public failures in television history? Was it the accusations from his ex-wife, or the Cat Williams drama, or the death hoaxes that keep targeting him? Or was it something else entirely, and maybe the moment with the teacher and the television sets he sent her every Christmas? Drop it in the comments. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me what you think. Honestly, because that is the kind of conversation this story deserves. If you learned something new today, or if this gave you a different perspective on a man you thought you already knew everything about, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who have never heard the full story. And if you are new here, welcome. This is how we do. We go deep. We tell the full story. We do not settle for the surface. Subscribe if that is the kind of content you want more of. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, the people making you laugh on television every day are carrying stories you know nothing about. A little empathy goes a long way.